Musioma, the Executive Secretary of Tax Justice Network Africa. It is Network Africa because it's a global network. Comrade Ivy will tell us more. You see on the program. Okay, so you see on the program, we had expected Savior Uwamba to also be with us to help have to distribute the discussion after Ivan might have made his presentation. Unfortunately, Savior cannot be with us. But we have Mrs. Monique Unzazabaganwa. Is the expression of the Rwandans that I want to see. Was it badly managed? Okay, the Rwandans are smiling. It was a good attempt. Thank you. She's the Vice Governor of the Central Bank of Rwanda. She will be joining us to... Dr. Felicien was asking me when I was starting, is it the case she's coming? Not a problem, because she's not speaking immediately. She will just come and join us. But we are not waiting. So I will just hand over this session to our General Secretaries. But to say that we will have this discussion till 11:30 tea break, then we will have been done with this. And then we will move to begin to see what is coming out from our communique, our report, our resolution. What is it we are taking away from here? We will discuss it together with our two General Secretaries. The attempt is to work very well to see if we can end at 3:30, so that some of you can have the time to visit Kigali, especially where it is symbolic, it is political, it is cultural. The whole thing that you might need to know why you are here. For those that are visiting for the first time, the idea would be to visit the Genocide Museum to see for yourself the story that has been told severally and with different coloration. I see a lot of persons are saying thumbs up to that. So for those of you that are interested, there is the buses will be available to take us there. Ancestral is organizing that. It has promised to do that. Comrade General Secretaries, please.
Thank you. Excellences, camarades, chers frères et sœurs et personnes ressources, bonjour. Donc, après 2 jours de débat et de discussion autour d'un thème crucial qui lié à l'avenir de notre continent, nous voilà donc entamer la dernière ligne droite de notre conférence. Et je suis sûr que les débats qui ont eu lieu, les discussions auxquelles j'ai assisté, nous ont tous inspirés de l'Afrique que nous voulons, du modèle de développement de l'Afrique. Donc, nous avons, durant cette conférence, abordé le thème de la transformation de l'Afrique. Et la transformation, je pense que j'ai entendu un des intervenants dire que nous ne devons pas subir la production de concepts, parce que c'est très dangereux. Nous devons avoir les capacités aussi, en tant que représentants des travailleurs, en tant que syndicalistes, de produire des concepts et de ne pas parce que les concepts ne sont pas neutres. Je veux dire par là, parlons de la transformation. De quoi exactement il s'agit? De quelle transformation? C'est de donner une meilleure forme à quelque chose. Donc, en tant que syndicaliste, quelle est la forme que nous voulons donner à cette Afrique? Est-ce que de la transformer en grand bazar, où nous importons des cure-dents? Est-ce que de transformer l'Afrique, un parc zoologique, où des gens viennent prendre des images et des photos, des documentaires et de les vendre, et même de tuer nos lions. Ou bien l'Afrique que nous voulons, quand il vient trouver de gratte-ciel, de grandes entreprises, de grands hôpitaux, de grandes universités, des enfants, des hommes, des femmes bien habillés et bien heureux. Nous voulons aussi transformer l'Afrique en un espace où les femmes ont le même droit que les hommes pour diriger le pays, pour diriger l'Afrique. Les femmes ne seront pas uniquement des objets producteurs de plaisir, ou aussi des machines de reproduction d'êtres humains. Nous voulons aussi transformer l'Afrique en un continent où les jeunes ont toute la possibilité d'exprimer leur génie et de se mettre au service du développement. Voilà l'Afrique que nous voulons. Et je pense que tout le monde est pour cette Afrique. Et pour cette raison, je demande à tout le monde d'applaudir cette Afrique que nous voulons. Nous avons parlé donc de cette transformation. Il lui faut un système. Ça ne peut pas se réaliser en dehors d'un système. Quel est le système convenable? C'est bien un système démocratique et aussi un système de bonne gouvernance. Nous avons besoin de leaders qui ont les capacités de diriger vers la bonne destination ce continent. Nous avons besoin de vrais pilotes et nous n'avons pas besoin d'hommes de cocotte. Nous avons besoin de vrais pilotes qui conduisent les affaires de l'Afrique et non pas des gens de cocotte qui remplissent leurs poches et leur ventre. Voilà ce que nous voulons. Donc, lorsque nous sommes bien administrés, lorsque nous sommes bien gouvernés, lorsque nous sommes bien gérés, je pense que notre rêve deviendra une réalité. Et encore, nous avons discuté qui peut réellement transformer l'Afrique. Il faut un système, il faut des forces aussi transformatrices de l'Afrique. Il faut faire appel à toutes les catégories existantes au sein de nos sociétés. Pas seulement une partie, les groupes et les individus. On a parlé des hommes, des jeunes, des syndicats, des associations, tous ceux qui peuvent apporter une pierre. Et ça a été l'objet de débats et de discussions. Mais la grande question qui se pose, après qui transforme l'Afrique? Avec quoi transformer l'Afrique? La grande question. Parce que dès lors, on devient non seulement des rêveurs, mais des gens d'illusion, des tordus d'esprit. Il faut qu'on revienne à la réalité. Avec quoi transformer l'Afrique? Il faut des moyens. Il faut quand même avoir les moyens de son rêve. Et nous avons déjà amorcé la question de moyens qu'il faut mobiliser. On a discuté sur les ressources naturelles. Les ressources naturelles. On a discuté aussi sur une pratique cancérigène qui est la corruption, qui fait couler, qui a provoqué une saignée de l'argent au continent. Et aujourd'hui, nous continuons aussi à parler d'un des phénomènes très présents et très répandus, il faut le dire, parce que si on n'approche pas la réalité avec un œil critique, nous n'allons jamais avancer. C'est vrai, de temps en temps, on se fait des bises. Mais de temps en temps aussi, il faut qu'on se dise des vérités en face. Il y a, sur le plan fiscal par exemple, est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, les États africains disposent de politiques et de systèmes fiscaux très efficaces en mesure de remplir les caisses d'État et de mobiliser suffisamment d'argent pour financer notre rêve? Ça, c'est la première question. Deuxièmement, nous avons une diaspora importante au niveau international. Nous avons plus de 30 millions d'Africains qui sont répartis à travers le monde. Et c'est une source importante en matière de financement, les remittances. Et tous ces Africains qui ont quitté l'Afrique, ce n'est pas pour aller s'amuser dans des casinos, mais c'est pour revenir et développer leur pays. Il y a le Mali, par exemple. 60% des infrastructures au niveau du Mali sont financés par la diaspora malienne. Et qu'en est-il aussi du reste de l'Afrique? Est-il aujourd'hui intéressant, nécessaire de s'intéresser à cette diaspora aussi, qui constitue une grande source pour rapatrier leurs fonds? Est-ce qu'il y a des politiques financières? Est-ce qu'il y a des réglementations financières qui favorisent le rapatriement de ces fonds, de ces milliards d'euros et de ces milliards de dollars? Vous savez que la fuite de capitaux, le montant d'argent qui quitte l'Afrique pour nourrir les pays industrialisés, il est estimé entre 600 et 700 milliards d'euros, ce qui représente 10 fois l'aide au développement des pays industrialisés pour les pays du Sud. C'est-à-dire, 1 euro qui vient du nord vers le sud, voilà, c'est 10 euros qui montent. C'est pas moi qui dis ça. Moi, je ne suis qu'un râleur. Moi, je ne suis qu'un parleur. Mais c'est des experts qui nous disent ça. Donc, je pense que toutes ces questions nous interpellent en tant qu'acteurs sociaux. Parce que si nous avons au cœur, en tant que syndicalistes, c'est parce que c'est nous qui payons les factures. C'est nous qui payons les factures. C'est pour ça qu'on s'intéresse à cette situation. Même les conflits. Quand il y a des malheurs qui tombent sur ce continent, ce sont nos enfants, ce sont nos femmes, ce sont les travailleurs qui payent, parce qu'on n'a pas les moyens d'acheter des billets d'avion. Et on n'a pas des pays de rechange et on n'a pas des continents de rechange. Et c'est pour cette raison, on veut acquérir, jouer notre rôle, notre plein rôle, pour faire de ce continent ce que nous rêvons. Donc pour ces deux questions, je laisse la parole à notre ami expert pour nous éclaircir de ce qui se passe sur le plan de la fiscalité. Voilà, est-ce que c'est une source sûre, est-ce que c'est une source efficace pour financer notre rêve? Et aussi, est-ce que les enfants de l'Afrique qui ont quitté ce continent ont un apport pour développer leur continent? Et je pense que la réponse est chez notre camarade Alvin Mosioma, qui est de Tax Justice Network. Seulement, je demande à nos camarades de faire un exercice, c'est-à-dire la bonne gouvernance du temps, de faire un exercice, c'est de concilier entre efficacité, faire bien et aussi en peu de temps. Voilà, mon ami, mon camarade, vous allez certainement nous éclairer par la torche de votre esprit. La parole est à vous.
Joel, need to fix this. I need to copy this. Okay. Good morning, comrades. Good morning, comrades. Comrade power. Thank you very much for this opportunity. First is an apology that I could not join you for the rest of the last days that you have been here, because I was away on another trip. I would have loved to be part of the conversations, which from the briefing I've received from my colleague have been very, very, very exciting conversations, and it's unfortunate that I missed that. Secondly, I have a confession to make. I'm not an expert. I'm an activist. And the knowledge that I have on these issues is knowledge that I've gathered over time. I'm an economist by training. And there's a joke they make about economists. They say, how do you identify an economist? An economist is someone who sees something working in practice and asks himself if it would work in theory. I am, in my training as in the economic school in Germany, the narrative about development, I did development economics, was very simple. At least the teachings was that poor countries, or African countries specifically, because for you to achieve economic growth, you need investments. And for you to have that investment, you need to build savings. But because of developing countries are poor and they cannot build the savings that are necessary to build investments, they cannot achieve economic growth until they structure the economic policies in a manner that they are able to attract external resources in the form of aid and foreign direct investments. And still today we see in many countries our economic policies are largely designed to make the countries as investor friendly as possible, because of that narrative that that's the only way African countries and developing countries in general can achieve economic development and break away from the chains of poverty. But the little time, the 7 years that I've been working on this issue, this narrative has been severely challenged. As the chair pointed out, researchers shows that Africa is a net creditor to the world. There are more resources leaving this continent as what is coming in aid and FDI combined. For every dollar that flows into Africa, there's over $5 flowing out as a result of what has been termed as illicit financial flows. And that is the main focus for my organization. The Tax Justice Network Africa is a Pan-African initiative that was launched at the World Social Forum in Nairobi in 2007 and seeks to provide a platform for activists, researchers, media, and all other concerned parties to have a conversation on how do we ensure that our policies, our fiscal policies, our tax policies are geared towards ensuring that African countries are able to generate the revenue they require to finance their own development and end the perpetual dependency on external aid. That's going to be the essence of my presentation. So in terms of structure of my presentation, first I'm going to look at the question of domestic resource mobilization, which at the moment has occupied quite some prominence in policy conversations, both internationally and regionally. So why is it important? How should we be discussing it? Secondly, I will look at what challenges African countries are facing in their efforts to generate domestic resources. Look at what kind of initiatives are being taken both at the government level and civil society to try and support this process of domestic resource mobilization and tackling the challenges that are related to illicit financial flows. I'll briefly make a cut to the development outcomes, basically looking at the finance for development process and what we can take home from that, the ongoing reforms in the international rules, and finish with what civil society organizations are doing in this arena. Now, as I was saying, if you look at the media, there's an increased focus on the issue of domestic resource mobilization. The whole Addis UN FFD process was all about how do we ensure that we are raising domestic resources. The UN post-2015, as the MDGs are coming to an end this year, has a strong emphasis on issues around domestic resource mobilization. The IMF recently did a report they call the Economic Spillover Report, where they were looking at the capacity of countries to generate resources. There's an ongoing process at the OECD level called the BEPS process, Base Erosion Profit Shifting, which is also aimed at tackling the global infrastructure, the global structures that facilitate resource leakage from countries. The AU, for those that have been following this process, in the very recent years, the summit has had very, very strong focus on issues around domestic resource mobilization. And finally, and I'll be speaking on this later on in more detail, but the AU UNECA high-level panel that was chaired by Mbeki, called the Mbeki panel, that was specifically looking at how African countries should do, what they should do to tackle the challenges of illicit financial flows and ensure that countries are able to generate domestic resources. So you look at this, it seems like domestic resource mobilization is the new kid on the block. But is it really? We take a few steps back. Already in 2002, my math has been right, that's over 20 years, the so-called Montreal Consensus to finance development, how many years? The Montreal Consensus on I was an economist, so you can see if I cannot calculate 2000 and 2015. Already had a focus on the importance of domestic resource mobilization. Actually, one of the key pillars was how to support developing countries to generate domestic resource mobilization, finance the MDGs. And we know what happened out of that. Many countries did not achieve the MDGs out of various reasons, but key among them being the lack of the sufficient resources to finance those ambitious goals. So, among other issues was the idea on how the conversation on how to mobilize international financial resources, particularly looking at FDI, or ODA, and other sources, but of course, more importantly, addressing the so-called systemic issues. So, colleagues and comrades, this is not a new agenda. It's only regaining focus again years later, and the reasons are obvious. One, we see as a result of the financial crisis, the two financial crises, the austerity measures that we are seeing across Europe, there is a trend to countries looking more inward and moving away from the international agenda. So many countries are not honoring their commitment they made in Montreal about the level of ODA they want to commit to finance particularly MDGs. There's a significant trend towards looking at private sector as the motor for development. Significant resources from ODA are being channeled through private sector, through the so-called PPPs and other different mechanisms of financing, with the argument that the private sector is more efficient as opposed to governments and so there is that kind of trend. Lastly, we see with the increased or expanding of the democratic space in many African countries, an impatient citizenry that's demanding for services. We see governments increasingly becoming under pressure to find ways of raising revenue to fulfill the requirements and the commitments that they're making in their campaigns. So this is increasing pressure on governments, and this is also one of the reasons why we are seeing a trend largely towards the domestic resource mobilization efforts of countries to raise domestic revenue. So why is it important? There's what we call the 4 R's of tax. Tax is what we say, man once said, the price we pay to live in a civilized society. To finance economic development in the most sustainable and reliable manner, tax is the key pillar to that. Tax enhances the social contract between citizens and their governments. We see this across Africa, many examples, in terms of how economic priorities are set. He who pays the piper calls the tune. In Kenya, I can give you an example a few years back, when the government was developing their financial budgets every year. Before those budgets are presented in Parliament, our finance minister would fly to Paris to meet the Club of Donors, the Paris Club of Donors, where they will do ticks and crosses and say, we don't want you to increase financing on education. We think there should be a cost sharing. On health, we think that you're employing too many nurses. And after that, on that basis, the money are put the resources are put available. And then you would have our ministers coming, smiling at the airport, saying our budgets, we have secured the funding for our budgets. And then they come to our own parliaments for symbol rubber stamping, which basically calls on the question, how do we relate to our own government? So at this conversation, tax stands at the heart of that in terms of enhancing the representation between governments and their own citizens. Tax can be used as a tool to address inequality, particularly when you consider many African countries are caught in the race to the bottom in terms of the increasing gap between the rich and the poor. If we have adequate and effective fiscal policies, we can be able to use tax as an instrument to be able to bridge the gap and ensuring that you have tax systems that are able to have a redistributive effect of taxing the rich and ensuring that the resources that are generated out of that are used to provide the essential services. When we look at the scenario in Africa, what we see is that on one side there's a positive trend towards the focus on tax mobilization. We look measured by the level of tax to GDP. Many countries still measure around between 18 and 20% of their tax to GDP. That in many countries, again, if you look at particularly on the recurrent budget, are largely financed by resources that are coming from tax. Of course, it's a mixed bag if you can't make a sweeping statement for across Africa, but this is a general trend that there's an increased focus and an increased role of tax in terms of financing development in many African countries as measured as a ratio of tax to GDP. But still, if you compare this with other developed economies, we still are below the mark because in developed countries, for instance, this share is about 32%. So what that says is that there is a significant, both a significant financing gap, but also a significant tax gap. Basically looking at the potential that many countries have to generate revenue and the actual revenue they are raising, that potential is very significant, and that's part of the conversation we need to have in terms of how do we ensure that we are bridging the gap and addressing the policy constraints that are limiting the ability of governments to raise domestic revenue to finance their development. That is a graph. I hope you're able to see it. If you see that it's just re-emphasizing the point I was making, that there's a significant trend towards the focus on domestic resources, but still Africa, as compared to other regions, still has a long way to go. In terms of challenges, domestic resource mobilization, it's a mixed. What we see is a number of challenges that are both domestic and international in nature. At the domestic level, we see that many countries are characterized by inefficient and ineffective tax systems. Particularly the trend in many countries towards regressive tax policies. Many countries are introducing VAT because it is being marketed as the easy tax to collect, particularly by the international financial institutions that are saying, because your revenue authorities are too weak, stop focusing on the complicated corporate income tax, let's just focus on taxes that are easy to collect and largely they are talking of VAT, and some of the arguments they make here is that many African countries are characterized by high levels of informality, and if you want to capture the revenue from those sectors, VAT is the tax of the future. That's the credo of some of these international financial institutions, particularly the World Bank and the IMF. Secondly, we see a trend in the efforts of countries, again, as I was saying earlier, to attract foreign investments, foreign direct investments, using tax policy as an instrument by providing huge, wide range of tax incentives aimed at attracting investment. So we see these regimes across Africa, companies enjoying 5 years, 10 years of tax holidays without paying a single dime. And the trend we see in this particular case in Kenya, in Uganda, is companies registering, enjoying the 5 years tax holiday, and after that period is over, they close shop, either move to the next, across the border to the next country, or they register under a new name to continue enjoying the same similar kind of tax incentives. There's a hotel in Tanzania that has been changing its names every 5 years. Because basically the Tanzanian government offers incentives that are aimed at attracting investment into the tourism sector. And these are trends we see in the horticulture sector, in any other different sector, in the extractive sector particularly, where companies are enjoying a wide range of tax incentives that are significantly eroding the ability and the capacity of states to generate, to capture the revenue, but also encouraging what you can call a race to the bottom, because countries are competing against each other. My organization, working together with ActionAid, did an analysis of West Africa, looking at the level of tax incentives that the countries in the West Africa region were providing to the corporate sector. And what we found out is that in the study that was looking at Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast, that all these countries were using tax incentives as a key tool of attracting investment, with the idea that tax incentives will lead to additional job creation, they will lead to economic spillovers in the sense of technology transfer, linkages within the different economies. But in reality, none of this, there was no evidence in any of this. The next one, please. So in terms of concrete figures, looking at the case of Ghana, the figures we found is that the Ghana was losing up to $2.7 billion each year as a result of tax incentives, and those are the figures that we managed to calculate in that period of time. In the case of Nigeria, the figure was about 2.9 billion each year, which is more than what the federal government budget spent on education. Similarly, if you put those figures into context, you find that governments are actually subsidizing. Tax incentives are subsidies for corporate sector. In total, if you look at the ECOWAS region, we are talking about a figure of about $9.8 billion. And as I was saying, this is basically leading to a race to the bottom. And as a recommendations, the report recommends the need to streamline the tax incentives within the ECOWAS region, eliminate some of these corporate tax incentives which are proven not to be ineffective, but not even contributing to attracting any kind of investment. There have been surveys that have been carried out within the corporate sector where companies are asked, what is it that you consider when you are deciding your investment destination? And tax scores number 8 or 9 out of the factors that companies consider. They want to look at the political climate. They want to look at the availability of resources. If it's a mining company, they want to look at the human resource that is available, reliable power, and all these kind of factors. Those are factors that are more important other than tax incentives, but still our governments in many countries still believe in this kind of earnest policies of using incentives as a form of attracting investments. So some of the recommendations this report also is for the review of institutionalizing public expenditure policies as part of the budget making process, so that when the minister is reading the budget in Parliament, is able to provide information on who is getting what kind of incentives, what is the cost of those tax incentives, and what are the actual benefits, so that it provides space for us to be able to track down how much we are giving away vis-a-vis what we are getting in return out of those kind of tax incentives. But also, more importantly, the idea of working at the regional level, at the sub-regional level, to ensure that countries are not competing against each other, but they're harmonizing their tax policies and avoiding being played against each other by companies. Comrades, the issue of illicit financial flows is one that we have been looking at, and Joel, in his introductory remarks, did mention the high-level panel, which was established after a long conversation within the AU Finance Ministers Summit. They set up a panel which was mandated to study the nature, the character of the illicit financial flows out of Africa, and came up with a report that was adopted in January by Africa's heads of state, who also issued a special declaration in terms of committing to adopt the recommendations of that report. The panel was chaired by, as I said, the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, and was tasked to determine the nature and the pattern of illicit financial flows from Africa, establish the level, assess the complexity in terms of what kind of channels are being used in terms of the resource leakage, and raise the awareness in general, beyond also proposing alternative recommendations and policies that needs to be carried out both at international, regional, and national level to tackle the challenges of illicit financial flows. And the report, in its summary, identified the following. One, that issues of IFF or illicit financial flows have both a push and pull factor. That there is on one side domestic policies that are encouraging illicit financial flows, but also at the same time their global infrastructure or their global financial architecture that is facilitating illicit financial flows. And as we discuss solutions, we need to look at it from both two dimensions. Excuse me. One, the poor governance structures in many African countries, the weak regulatory structures, the issues I mentioned around tax incentives, double tax agreement, another big area of work, where we see many countries in Africa signing double tax agreements that actually, in their theoretical sense, are supposed to ensure that companies are not being taxed twice, but in the ultimate, in the reality on practice, they are ensuring that companies are being not taxed at all. So you find, for example, if Kenya signs, and at the moment they have just signed a double tax agreement with Mauritius, a company that is registered in Mauritius ends up not paying tax in Kenya and not paying tax in Mauritius at the same time, beating the whole sense of what a double tax agreement is supposed to be. And we are seeing this trend, particularly from tax havens, a race towards signing double tax agreements with developing countries, and using those tax havens as a conduit for investments. You would be surprised to know that 70% of investments that are channeled to India all emanate from a small island of Mauritius. And it's not that because there are very many rich Mauritians that want to invest in India, it's because Mauritius provides that kind of environment that enables companies to use that as a conduit. And we are seeing this also in Kenya. There are statistics that indicate that a big chunk of portfolio investment in the stock market are all channeled through Mauritius. There are a number of Kenyan companies that are moving their headquarters or their subsidiaries to Mauritius simply for the purpose of wanting to exploit some of the loopholes in the double tax agreements. And the financial secrecy jurisdictions, of course, that's the elephant in the room in terms of the kind of secrecy and opacity that the tax havens across the world, particularly in Europe, are providing and acting as the magnet for both corruption but also illicit outflows of resources through tax evasion and tax avoidance, particularly by multinational companies. In terms of figures, of course, the famous figure of 50 billion, this is what that report finds out, that African countries loses annually up to about 50 billion. We tried to put those figures into context in terms of what those 50 billion could do, and we calculated that with the 50 billion annually, you can be sure that you can construct the most modern hospital in all the 54 countries annually in each country. If those, and you can be able to play those figures in terms of measuring how much it is to build a railroad from Cape Town to Addis. In total, between 1980 and 2008, this figure is estimated to be about $1 trillion that were lost as a result of IFF. And a big chunk of it, as the study finds out, is that 60% of these losses, or 60 to 65% of these losses, is a result of activities of harmful activities of multinational companies. Not more. Thank you. So as I was saying, the report finds out that the major avenue of illicit financial flows is a result of activities of multinational companies who, in the way that they structure, this is an example that I decided to pick out of a mining company called Glencore in Zambia, in terms of how it has structured itself to ensure that it's able to shift profits within its different subsidiaries and ensure that over time it's not paying taxes in the places where it is carrying out its economic activity, and in this case, the case of Zambia. And this is not even surprising. We look at some other mining companies in Tanzania, for example, we found out that one mining company can have up to 300 subsidiaries. Now put yourself in the position of a finance revenue officer, and you're supposed to manage one single company that has got 300 subsidiaries, and it's telling you we did intra-company trade, we sold this, we hired management fee, we hired a credit to go. Becomes a very messy and complex situation, and particularly when you bring the tax havens into the mix, which are very reluctant in terms of providing the necessary information that would enable revenue authorities to track down the operations of these companies. In terms of impact, the report points out that the IFF weakens public institutions, it not only just leading to the revenue loss, but also acting as an avenue for corruption and criminal activities that are contributing to insecurity in Africa. Since I have very few moments, I'll try to rush a little bit, then we can have more conversation. Please. Again, in terms of fiscal impacts, the discouragement of when we are talking of the efforts to bring more, contribute to increased transparency, IFF are actually undermining those efforts. The report comes up with a number of recommendations. I'm not going to go through all that. The report is available in both. If you look at the ITUC website, you definitely see the report there, and also in my own organization's website, you'll be able to see what some of those recommendations. But in general, the report comes up with about 15 recommendations of what both countries need to do and what the global community needs to do to tackle the challenges that are related to IFF. And some of these are institution-related. They need to strengthen African institutions, establishing specialized units that are able to track the operations of these companies, reviewing the tax incentive system that companies are receiving, reforming the double tax agreement that countries are offering or signing across the country. So some of the recommendations, I already mentioned them earlier on, but in a nutshell, the report outlines a number of recommendations that that governments need to undertake to tackle the challenges of IFF. Now, I'll make a small detour to the FFD process. For those that were involved, you might know that the big campaign or the big conversation in Addis was about how do we ensure that as we move towards setting up ambitious goals in the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the requisite global framework that ensures that we're able to raise the resources to finance those ambitious goals. So one of the key demands that civil society organizations were pushing in Addis was the need to move the conversation and the policy-making rules of international tax away from the current OECD to a more international global body. Because the way the structure looks right now, it is the people it is the institutions and countries that are benefiting from the current weaknesses in the system that are also on the driver's seat in terms of determining the international rules of taxation. So that was the main conversation in Addis, but unfortunately, due to high resistance, particularly from interested parties, the US and the UK particularly, this was not achieved. So Addis, in my own opinion, became a missed opportunity in so many ways. The document in terms of the language on what countries, what as a global community we need to do to tackle challenges of IFF remains very weak language, which of course yeah, 5 minutes, I'm almost done. Heading to the last five slides. Now, in terms of the push as a global constituency, we have been demanding for three very simple things. Simple, if you think of them. One is that we need to change the international rules to ensure that companies are reporting their profits on a country-by-country basis. At the moment, companies are able to consolidate their profits, and you're not able to see what kind of intra-company trade is happening within the different jurisdictions. 70% of global trade happens between companies that are in one way or the other related. And 50% of this trade is channeled through tax havens. So if you don't have transparency in terms of what companies are actually doing in the different countries, you are unable to determine if the profits that they are declaring or the losses that they're declaring are the actual losses. Secondly, mechanisms to ensure that there's a transparency in how countries are able to access information on the tax reports of the individual companies and individuals. So Kenya, how does Kenya access the information of their taxpayers from Jersey, from the different jurisdictions? At the moment, Kenya has to go through an elaborate process of requesting that information, providing evidence why they want that information, and the big push is to ensure that there's a global framework that ensures that countries are exchanging this information on an automatic basis. And lastly, ensuring that there is a global framework that ensures that there's a public registry on the beneficial ownership. Who are the actual blood and flesh owners of the different companies? Because you find that some of these companies register opaque companies. There's a famous quote by Obama when he was running for the first time for the president. He says there's a building in Cayman Island that has got 12,000 offices, company headquarters. And he says that must be either the biggest building in the world or the biggest tax scam in the world. And I will leave it to you to guess which one of that it is. Lastly, comrades, as civil society organizations, we have been engaged in a number of efforts to try and contribute to this effort. And as an organization, we have engaged. We are engaging Parliament through the African Parliamentary Network on IFF, which is a regional network that brings parliamentarians that are interested on these conversations, and also trying to work with the media in terms of trying to see kind of training we can be able to provide for them to expose some of the practices of these companies. And Stop the Bleeding is, as some of you are lucky to have gotten the T-shirt, is a campaign that was established and set off by 6 organizations that are mirrored there, ITUC being one of them, the Tax Justice Network, FemNet, Afrodat, and Trust Africa and Third World Network, which aims at broadening the conversation on the challenges that are related to illicit financial flows. The campaign aims at generating knowledge and providing resources for action. It aims at mobilizing the masses and different constituencies to be able to put the pressure on governments and those and other actors to institute the necessary reforms to seal the loopholes that are encouraging the outflow of resources. Also engaging in policy conversations, particularly at the AU level. The main objective, the campaign which was launched in Nairobi in June, aims at pushing particularly the implementation of the Mbeki panel report. We were asking the question, yes, since you have ratified this report at the AU level, what concrete measures are you taking at the national level to ensure that those recommendations are implemented? One of the main targets is we hope to mobilize 1 million signatures to be able to provide that unified voice of Africa on this agenda. And since then, now the rest are just beautiful pictures. I will not bore you with a lot of text. We did a launch in Nairobi, which was very successful. That was the first launch that we held in Nairobi. This was again followed in Addis, where on the fringes of the FFD meeting in Addis, we had a session where we launched this campaign to the global audience, and this was in Lome, particularly under the leadership of ITUC, where also another public launch. So in conclusion, comrades, the question that I would want as a food for thought is, why should we as trade unions be involved, and what is it that we can do? I think that, and this is public statement, that there is an increased focus of taxation of labor and consumption as opposed to the taxation of capital. If you are not on the table, you're on the menu. There is need for trade unions to be involved in these conversations, particularly when you see the trend, as I mentioned, of increased trend of taxing labor and taxing consumption. The citizens, without a representative tax framework, it undermines the representation and participation of citizens in the design of policy, and also shifts the burden of taxation from the low-income groups, and thus contributing to increasing inequality. And as trade unions, and this will be my concluding remarks, I think that there is need to expose the false narrative about the public sector corruption, while in essence and in reality, the big part of the culprits in terms of real corruption is the role that unscrupulous multinational companies are playing in terms of looting and siphoning resources from the continent. And of course, it goes without saying that a dime that is not paid to the government, and of course assuming that that government spends that money well, it undermines human rights, particularly the second generation human rights, the access to health, the access to education. All these requires resources, and I think the chair did mention this. We need to ensure that we are holding multinational companies accountable for their practices and mobilizing members across the region to ensure that they are part of this campaign. So I hope that you have done some of this. There's a declaration to sign, both online and the physical one. My colleague told me that many of you have already signed this, and that is the final what the declaration says, and I will read it loud. I believe in a democratic, prosperous, and equitable Africa, whose wealth benefits its people, and I support the Stop the Bleeding campaign to end the illicit flows from Africa and the continent's exploitation and impoverishment and unjust economic relations. Thank you very much, Chair, for your patience, and I'm open to questions.
Merci, camarades, parce que vous vous êtes présenté beaucoup plus comme militant, activiste, et tant mieux, parce que ça montre que les militants peuvent combiner entre le savoir et aussi la conviction et l'action. Donc on remercie en votre nom notre camarade militant pour sa brillante présentation. quantifiées et aussi bien décrites. Voilà les réalités, et on retient dans sa présentation, qui est très pédagogique, bien structurée, bien architecturée, d'abord que nos systèmes économiques ne sont pas suffisamment robustes pour faire face à la compétition internationale et au système international. Et aussi, nos systèmes doivent aussi faire leur toilette pour être plus attractifs. Mais l'attractivité, bien sûr, pas au détriment de la justice sociale et les intérêts des couches sociales les plus démunies. Et vous avez vu à travers son intervention que l'Afrique est le continent qui exporte plus d'argent qu'il en encaisse. L'Afrique donne plus d'argent, plus qu'il en encaisse. Alors, c'est 10 dollars ou 10 euros qui sortent et un qui rentre. Cette équation, je pense aussi, mérite beaucoup de réflexion de la part des syndicats. Et nous avons aussi vu l'état, il a présenté l'état des lieux. L'état des lieux, il y a le phénomène de l'informalité qui prive des États d'une ressource importante. Et il y a la fuite illégale des capitaux. Il a cité l'exemple, par exemple, de Thabo Mbeki, qui donne le chiffre de 37 milliards. Et la moitié, ce sont des multinationales. Ça aussi, c'est un argent qui passe par des canaux qu'on ne voit pas. Et je pense qu'il est aussi de notre droit de se demander où est cet argent et de le mettre au service du développement. Et aussi un système fiscal qui n'est pas très efficace. Il est un peu grippé, qu'il faut vraiment améliorer. Il y a le manque de transparence, l'accès à l'information, par exemple. Moi, je voulais, dans la bonne gouvernance, les médias jouent un rôle important. Eh oui, les médias jouent un rôle important. Il n'y a pas de bonne gouvernance, il n'y a pas de démocratie possible lorsque les journalistes sont bâillonnés. Et voilà, pour les défis, dit que voilà, il y a des défis après avoir fait un état des lieux. Voilà les défis. D'abord, il faut compter sur soi. C'est de retrousser des manches, c'est-à-dire qu'il faut trouver des sources génératrices de financement au niveau local. Lutter contre la fuite illégale des capitaux. On a vu des sommes quand même qui donnent des vertiges, qui sortent par voie illégale. Mettre en place des systèmes transparents, accès à l'information, etc. Et aussi la question du secret bancaire. Ça aussi, c'est une question qui mérite d'être piochée. Parce que c'est quoi le secret bancaire? Et ça encourage qui? Ça sert qui? C'est des questions. Lutter contre l'informalité qui prive. Il a donné l'exemple du Ghana, par exemple. Les statisticiens qui donnent 50% que l'État ghanéen perd en matière de fiscalité. C'est important. Et la question aussi, il a abordé la question des paradis fiscaux d'une manière indirecte. Bon, pour nous, ça peut être de l'enfer quelque part, mais ici c'est un paradis. Pour certains, parce qu'ils engrangent des sommes colossales et de manière illégale. Changer la réalité financière aussi. Et voilà, le défi, c'est que arriver aussi à changer la réalité financière. C'est-à-dire que ce qui existe aujourd'hui ne favorise pas cette politique de compter sur soi ou la génération des ressources locales ou le renforcement des recettes fiscales, des moyens de l'État, qui à partir de là ne pouvant financer les services sociaux, etc., et assurer une bonne distribution du revenu national, et qui est la raison d'être des syndicats. Il faut aussi un cadre international. Il faut un cadre international qui permet, transparent, Il y a des entreprises comme ça, anonymes, qui sont enregistrées de manière opaque, il y a de l'opacité. Donc voilà, c'est un bâtiment avec du verre fumé. Donc il faut un peu, il faut des anti-buées pour voir quelles sont ces entreprises. Et ils prennent aussi, c'est la contribution de la société civile, le rôle des médias pour, par exemple, une compagnie, arrêté la signer, c'est-à-dire l'argent qui fuit. Il a proposé une série d'actions, mais il conclut alors qu'il ne faut pas seulement taxer les travailleurs. Parce que nous, on paye l'impôt à la source. Et ils augmentent et ils ponctionnent. Mais il y a des entreprises, il y a des grosses fortunes qui ne sont pas taxées. Ça aussi, c'est un grand challenge. Donc, je vous remercie beaucoup pour cette brillante présentation. Donc, après notre camarade, nous allons ouvrir le débat et je suis sûr qu'il a stimulé votre appétit. D'abord, en votre nom, nous souhaitons la bienvenue à Madame Monique Nsazambaganois. On lui souhaite la bienvenue. Elle est vice-gouverneur de la Banque centrale du Rwanda. J'espère qu'il nous a ramené un peu d'argent. Et je suis sûr aussi qu'elle maîtrise la question financière. Et à travers son expérience et son savoir, elle pourra nous éclairer davantage sur ce phénomène. Donc, sans trop tarder, je lui passe la parole et nous lui demandons d'être très court, très efficace, parce que nous sommes aussi tenus par la règle de la bonne gouvernance du temps. Madame, je vous passe la parole.
Merci beaucoup. I'll continue in English. Good morning, everyone. Chairman, all the comrades. Maybe I'm not a comrade, but I'm the vice governor, trained economist like you are, and I agree with all of your presentation, which is really objective in terms of evidence that we have on the continent and the challenges. I will start by saying that this issue of illicit financial flows, as the presentation has put it very clearly, it's not an African issue. It's a global issue, and Africa has a role to play in it. Rwanda has a role to play in really addressing this issue, and cooperation and collaboration across the borders. That's key. A second point I would also like to really appreciate is that the shift is now moving from public corrupt governments, the so-called, to really putting in the light that private sector and big corporations. But also I'll come back to the role of the citizens. And that's why I like the theme on democracy and governance. Because this is really speaking to all of us as the citizens of our nations, of our countries, that there's no one else to come up with solutions. Even if it's to fix the administration, to implement reforms, to really modernize the financial sector, to work on the issue of data and transparency. We have all the responsibility in this, and we have a role to play in really behaving like responsible citizens. And citizens are like individuals, but also companies are citizens. And we have that responsibility. In a democracy, you also have, you have to be held responsible as a citizen as well. So it's like a double traffic web. Another point I want to make is there is a huge correlation between these illicit financial flows and how the economy manages in terms of growth, in terms of poverty reduction, and in terms of inequalities. That's a fact. It's evidence out there shows that. So I'm happy to say that in Rwanda, what we are doing as a country, as an economy, as a people, as the leadership, is really working hard to make the economy grow, to make the doing business environment friendly, not only for foreign direct investors, but also for local investors. And by the way, here, the domestic investors contribute more on our investments balance in the FDIs. We care for all of them. And we've seen poverty reducing. We are now at 39%. And also the inclusion, the Gini coefficient reducing to 0.442. And we are among the few African countries really to reach most of the MDGs. I think we've just missed one or two on that one. Another point is these issues of IFF is also correlated to the governance. And the governance is just not political governance, but it's also macroeconomic governance. In an economy where you have like high rocketing inflation and unpredictable policies and corruption and so on and so forth, you kind of creating an incentive for those companies to behave the way they're behaving. And in Rwanda, what we are seeing is really good macroeconomic management, political management, and so on and so forth. And we are also kind of contributing to raising the domestic capacity to carry our budgets, which now has increased to 66% of the budget from a time after the genocide where we used to have a round table to really kind of beg donors to really contribute to the rebuilding of our country. So I'm seeing progress there. This issue to be addressed, it needs real collaboration and a number of things to be done on legal frameworks, on institutions, and on infrastructure to really crack it down. And the central bank here in Rwanda, we play a role in this as one of the institutions. And we have a legal framework that is conducive. We have a penal code that is clear on these issues, really stating them as a criminal indeed. And we have a law on anti-money laundering and combating financing terrorism. And we've been the first country in Africa to implement that Dodd-Frank Act on tagging and implementing a transparency and how do I put it? It's like a monitorable or traceable system on the mining and that tagging system. We have put in place institutions like the Office of the Ombudsman, the Auditor General. The Rwanda Revenue Authority is a really very efficient administration, tax administration, and the police, especially the RPD, that is working really on preventing tax evasion and tax fraud. I mentioned the Financial Investigation Unit, of which the central bank governor is the chair of the board. We have a capital market and so on and so forth, and the RGB, the host of this event. So on institutions, we work together to really make sure that we complement each other in our respective roles to play a consistent role and effective one. In terms of infrastructure, I see that this modernization of payment systems is playing a huge role in really putting the data on the open. We have a completely integrated real-time gross settlement system, RTGS, which is linked to ESC and to COMESA systems. We are now, we work on financial inclusion and really reducing informality so that as much as possible, many people are on the system. The tax administration has started implementing those billing machines. All of those helped by this ID, national ID system. They're helping us really to build an infrastructure that is IT harnessing, and that can help us in coordinating information and in tracking. Our banks, we are very serious on know your customer rules, and as a central bank, that's our role to enforce them. And all of them have sound core banking systems, and we are investing as a central bank in a solution that is upgrading the SWIFT. The SWIFT, you know, is this international transfer system, so that we can be able to track and even monitor the sanctions, so that we don't really open doors to these kinds of flows. So I will stop it here, just to say that this is not an issue that one institution or one country even can tackle. It's an issue for all of us to play a role in it. And the cooperation and coordination is key. And in order to really do it effectively, focusing really on governance, on growth, on reducing poverty and inequality, and on creating an environment for the businesses really to behave responsibly is key. Empowering the citizens, women, the youth, the civil society, it's going to be key in this fight. Data and transparency is another imperative that countries really have to work together on to be able to have a coordinated response to this problem. And I would like to really appreciate the organizers of this conference and the RGB for having thought about our role in this, so that we can share and learn. I've learned a lot in terms of how actually countries deal with this challenge of trying to understand all of these subsidiary thing, the transfer pricing. We face it also in our financial institutions, for instance. And that's something that I've just learned, that we have really to seriously think about it and see how, in terms of regulations and rules, but also in terms of really coordinating, we can keep this at the minimum. Thank you so much.
Merci, Madame. À travers votre intervention, vous m'avez confirmé quelque chose, une citation de Foucault qui dit « Ce que nous pouvons dire dans un livre, nous pouvons le dire dans quelques phrases. » Et aujourd'hui, j'ai vérifié à travers votre intervention. Vous avez concilié de manière brillante entre efficacité et aussi temps, et la gestion du temps. Et ça montre qu'aussi les femmes ont des capacités non seulement de diriger des banques, mais aussi de diriger des nations. Et on doit rappeler que la présidente de la Commission de l'Union africaine est une femme. Et aussi la présidente du Sierra Leone est une femme. La présidente du Libéria aussi est une femme. La présidente du Malawi est une femme. Et j'espère que la prochaine présidente du Rwanda sera une femme. Je ne dirai pas que ça serait vous, mais c'est le peuple rwandais qui le dira. Donc, voilà, elle a effectivement brossé un tableau sur la situation de la finance et surtout, elle a mis l'accent sur la fuite illégale. Effectivement, ce n'est pas un phénomène africain, c'est un phénomène mondial, mais qu'on vit beaucoup plus. Et il y a des raisons, donc, ils nous ont expliqué. Et nous a montré aussi l'expérience rwandaise. Voilà comment on peut compter sur soi pour financer le développement. Et nous a dit que, voilà, nous avons pu mobiliser 60%. Voilà, 66%. C'est-à-dire que c'est possible de compter sur ses propres capacités. Donc, elle nous a donné aussi l'expérience sur les institutions mises en place, etc., les résultats obtenus et les défis aussi qui nous attendent. Donc, je ne vais pas répéter tout ça. Vous avez certainement enregistré ce qu'ils vous ont présenté. Maintenant, ce que je pense, nous attendons aussi votre réaction. Mais je suggère à ce qu'on soit très bref. Parce que ici, ce qui a été présenté est chiffré. Donc, il ne peut pas faire l'objet d'une controverse. Il est chiffré, quantifié. Je vous propose, parce que nous sommes contraints par le temps, est-ce que nous pouvons, par exemple, prendre 5 interventions? Vous savez pourquoi j'ai pris le chiffre de 5? Ce n'est pas démocratique, bien sûr. 5 parce que ça symbolise la main. Et la main symbolise l'unité. Voilà, nous allons prendre donc 5 interventions. Et si nous avons encore de la plus-value, nous allons encore distribuer. Alors, donc la parole est à vous. Et j'espère aussi que vous allez réagir de manière très enrichissante. Et j'en suis sûr. Il y a 8 interventions. Donc, nous avons... Bon, on prend la 9e. Hein. La 9e, voilà, on donne 9 visas par jour. C'est bon. Et je demande aussi à nos camarades d'aller droit au but. C'est-à-dire, voilà la question, pour donner quand même du temps à nos intervenants pour répondre et nous éclairer sur vos questions. Alors, la première, c'est... Est-ce que vous pouvez me lire ça parce que c'est ghanéen? Kennedy, à vous la parole. Kennedy à Tchakoma. Alors, passez au pupitre. Vous avez un exercice d'1 minute.
Thank you very much, moderator. I want to thank the 2 presenters for their brilliance. But I want to say that the issue of tax justice or injustice is self-inflicted by our various governments. But I like the point that when he said, why should the unions be involved? And what can the unions do? Before I come to that, a recent report by some group of journalists has found that the MTN group has been shipping funds before tax to Dubai and onward transfer to Mauritius, just to avoid tax evasion. And they didn't deny this. Uganda is involved, MTN Uganda, Ghana, South Africa, and Nigeria. And recently, there are some fines of MTN Nigeria. They didn't deny it. They have categorically stated that the authorities are aware, so they are not doing anything illegal. That comes to the various countries, the kind of policies they enter into with these multinationals. But what can the unions do? Yeah, I agree with the fact that this is not a new thing, but it is something that the focus has not been there. And I believe that the unions should do what we know best and can do best in our various countries. We need to strengthen the advocacy. We need to get into the legislative framework. We need to get into the administration of taxes, the monitoring, even at our various country levels, beyond the way governments are using taxes. There are some benefits that tax reliefs that our citizens can enjoy. For instance, in Ghana, there are tax reliefs for the disabled, tax reliefs for education, for married couples. But we are not aware of these things. So I think that when we talk about tax justice, it is not about the way taxes are collected alone and used, but how we can also be aware. Given the fact that if you look at the principles of taxation, it is about getting the people to understand why they are paying taxes and paying according to their ability. These are the fundamental principles of taxation in economics. Are we doing that? I think that the unions need to step up and do what we know best and can do best. We can build alliances, as I've seen in the presentation, with other civil society organizations, so that together we can have a collective voice that can push for the change we are all looking for, that transformation. And it is now. Thank you.
Merci pour votre intervention et votre passion de militant engagé. Donc, je la parole aussi à notre partenaire, Nodiso Twala de la Fédération des employés, Federation of Employers of Swaziland. We request to you, please, to be very short.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. And the first one relates to the issue of what my colleague has just also talked about, the issue of tax havens, such as, for example, Mauritius. I've had the privilege of sitting in a meeting in which I heard one businessman from a multinational company, and he was saying, you know what, it seems like we would like, if we are having so much trouble in terms of the authorities here in Swaziland, it's best that maybe we just pack up and go to Mauritius. This was a veiled threat, of course. Now, I am asking, is there a way for us to have a sort of a peer review system to try and confront these so-called tax havens like Mauritius? You know, because they result in a lot of damage to our individuals' countries, as has been alluded in the presentation. The other one, also relates to the issue of my understanding of the presentation on tax was when you talk about domestic resource mobilization. Are there any other systems, ways of collecting tax beyond taxation, outside of taxation, resource mobilization outside of taxation. I'm saying this because I think there's a huge burden in terms of business carrying a lot of tax, or the local populace having a huge tax burden in a sluggish economy, in an economy that is not really performing. What ideas can we have for this resource mobilization? Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. Et je suis sûr, à travers votre intervention, que vous payez correctement vos impôts, parce que vous êtes employeur. Alors, et j'espère que cet exemple s'élargit à tous les autres intervenants économiques, opérateurs économiques. La prochaine intervention, et j'espère aussi qu'il sera très courte, c'est Eru Kaya, Tukta, Tanzania. Alors, you have the floor, please. And we request you to be short and efficient.
Thank you, Chair. I want to avoid myself becoming one of the complainants, because people are saying trade unions are always, or are traditionally, complainants, and they don't have any fundamental action. Now, what I want to say, unless the trade unions in Africa stand firm and say no to illicit financial flow in our countries, no more tax evasion, no more tax avoidance, and the unnecessary tax exemption, no more corruption. What we are advocating here for these 3 days will be like the fish tears which goes with water in the sea or in the river. Unless the trade unions stop to be the supporters of corruptive political parties, unless the trade unions stop to support corruptive public officials, there is no transformation, there is no Africa's transformation, both economically or socially. You find a situation where we have a trade union leaders who are also the political party officials, and when they mess, when they multi-practice in their position as local government officials, we, trade unions, we embrace them and even support them. I want to tell you, Mr. Chairman, and the floor, all what we are discussing here for these 3 days, the solution is good governance. And good governance, we have a role to play as trade unionists. The problem is we have kept ourselves talking. We don't take action. Most of the trade unions. And really, it is very painful that we are supporting culprits, the corruption culprits, the people who are mistreating, who are mispracticing their offices. We are the ones who are supporting them. Unless we stop, we are wasting our time here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Merci, camarades. Et beaucoup de passion aussi se dégage à travers vous. Et on a besoin de cette passion parce qu'elle nous donne l'énergie. Et la lutte a besoin de cette énergie. Le prochain, c'est Madromad Sanier, c'est de Sénégal. Sanier, alors, je m'excuse, hein, mais vous, parce que vous écrivez comme un médecin, moi je n'ai pas fait de la sténographie.
Voilà, je vous remercie, Président. Comme nous le savons tous, le document de référence de l'Afrique, c'est l'agenda 2063, qui devrait tendre l'Afrique vers le développement durable. Pour cela, il faut qu'il y ait une volonté politique de nos dirigeants. Et vous conviendrez avec moi qu'une volonté politique n'est rien sans une volonté citoyenne que nous devons théoriser. Les priorités africaines définies dans l'agenda 2063 resteront une rhétorique si l'Afrique ne trouve pas les moyens nécessaires à la transformation de cette vision. Certes, les présentateurs ont eu à proposer quelques mesures qu'il faudrait prendre. Je vais en rajouter pour proposer encore 6 mesures que je voudrais partager avec vous. Réformer l'administration fiscale et juridique, élaborer des instruments de financement qui nous permettent d'intégrer les marchés financiers, faciliter le commerce interafricain, renforcer le rôle des marchés obligatoires, stimuler les investissements et améliorer l'environnement politique et réglementaire. Et au niveau mondial, faudrait-il réformer la gouvernance mondiale, améliorer l'accès au marché, lutter contre la sortie illicite de capitaux, c'est ce qu'il faut à l'Afrique. Et ce qu'il faut à l'Afrique, c'est beaucoup plus l'impulsion, la volonté d'amener la transformation des populations et l'ambition. Et comment faudrait-il le faire? Il faudrait prendre en compte les caractéristiques structurelles de nos économies. Par rapport à l'explosion démographique, parce que nous avons lu l'exemple rwandais depuis hier, mais nous avons constaté aussi qu'il y a une explosion démographique, et donc tout cela devrait être encadré. Parce que l'exercice que nous avons eu à faire ces 3 jours, alors c'est comme une analyse comparative entre le Rwanda et le reste de l'Afrique. Placer la création d'emplois au centre des stratégies de développement. Troisièmement, les approches territoriales, multisectorielles et locales, et libérer les potentiels des territoires du continent en s'appuyant sur les ressources locales spécifiques. C'est ce qui nous permettrait au moins de mobiliser des ressources, parce que déjà, on ne peut pas aujourd'hui alors considérer le mouvement syndical comme un cadre où pratiquement nous reviendrons en 50 ans en arrière avec le classicisme, mais le mouvement syndical doit être proactif et des propositions concrètes que nous devons faire à l'Union africaine pour que cela soit pris en compte dans l'agenda 2063 pour la mobilisation des ressources en Afrique. Je vous remercie.
Merci, mon camarade et mon frère. Vous avez été bref. D'ailleurs, nous allons créer le prix de la question la plus courte et la plus rapide. Voilà, celui qui pose la question la plus courte et la plus rapide et la plus sensée aura un prix. Le prochain, c'est Abdul Karim, Panafrican, Movement of Rwanda. And we request to you also to be very short and very efficient.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank the presenters for the paper, which was very deep and talking about the realities on the ground about taxes in Africa. I support the 2 presentations, and I just want to add in something. One, we need to pay taxes. And the taxes are paid by the people who work. But our people are not empowered to work. I can give an example whereby if we look into the mining sector of our countries and look at the locals who work in this sector, we'll find them maybe in big numbers, but their produce is too small. We have given it to foreigners, whom we give also the tax holidays of 10 years, of which, after they have finished everything, they just get away, as the professor there said. So we need to empower people in these sectors. That is number 1. Number 2, I don't think that we need to negotiate with any other person about our agricultural products. Like in this region here, East Africa and Central Africa, we produce tea, coffee. In West Africa, like Cote d'Ivoire, they produce cocoa, rubber, and other products. When we take them to the market, we don't decide on their prices. The people who come from outside, they come to buy our things on their own prices. This year, your coffee will be taken for $1. Your kilogram of tea will be taken for $0.50, and so on and so forth. And when they bring back the finished material of our own products, they bring it in with their prices again. A kilogram of tea will buy it $2. A kilogram of finished coffee will buy it for $3, and so on and so forth. I think we have to put the prices ourselves. Now, if we want to be free and totally free, we need to free in our minds. They are no longer colonialists on our land, but they are in our minds. So let us clear up our minds, and then we go forward together, as we were saying there. I was ashamed when I was reading on this banner behind you. Even conducting this conference, we needed someone from out of Africa to assist us to conduct it. I hope that next time we meet, we support ourselves or sponsor ourselves to conduct such conferences. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Merci, camarades panafricanistes. Et je vois que vous avez le cœur plein. Et la tête pleine aussi. Bon, alors, sans trop tarder, le prochain intervenant, c'est Jean-Pierre Kimbouya de l'Union fait la force. Effectivement, l'Union fait la force. Et unissons-nous alors. Jean-Pierre Kimbouya, à vous la parole de manière succincte et efficace.
Merci, Président de séance, pour la parole. Et en fait, j'ai suivi attentivement l'intervention de Mme Monique, vice-gouverneure de la Banque centrale du Rwanda, et de M. Monsiona, expert. 66% du budget du Rwanda mobilisé sur ressources propres. Quel a été le miracle? Et pour M. Monsiona, nous avons suivi qu'il y a l'évasion fiscale, 50 milliards par an pour l'Afrique, et la main invisible, ce sont les multinationales. Comment mettre fin à cela? Mais aussi en termes de contribution. J'interpelle ici nous, mouvement syndical, parce que l'histoire de toutes les sociétés jusqu'à nos jours est une histoire de la lutte des classes, comme l'avait dit Marx. C'est vrai qu'il y a une faiblesse du leadership au niveau politique en Afrique, mais il y a aussi une faiblesse du leadership syndical. Quel est le registre des connaissances du mouvement syndical sur les questions liées à la fiscalité, sur les questions liées aux richesses produites au niveau de nos nations, sur les questions liées à la redistribution des richesses? C'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, les mouvements syndicaux africains doivent se constituer comme un contre-pouvoir syndical au niveau continental. Mais pour cela, il faut un rapport de force. Rapport de force non pas seulement en mobilisation de militants, parce qu'il y a des traîtres au niveau africain, non pas seulement au niveau des politiciens, mais au niveau du mouvement syndical aussi. Les rapports de force, mais il faut maîtriser tous ces dossiers qui peuvent nous aider à être éclairés, mais aussi ne pas seulement demeurer force revendicative, mais force de proposition, surtout force de proposition. Mobilisation des Africains pour la transformation de l'Afrique. C'est vrai que les porteurs nous a été tracés par tous les intervenants. Une Afrique juste et égalitaire. Mais attention, il nous faut un agenda. Il faut un agenda, il ne faut pas que ça soit flou. Un agenda. 5 ans, 10 ans après, et pour la postérité. Pour cela, nous devons penser à la jeunesse qui va prendre la relève. 10 ans après, il faut que nous soyons capables d'évaluer où en sommes-nous. Sinon, ça va être une conférence pour rien. Nous devons avoir des capacités de suivi et des capacités d'évaluation. Le mouvement syndical africain, s'il fonctionne comme un réseau au niveau de chaque État pour faire des évaluations de manière périodique, nous pouvons atteindre cet objectif de la transformation de l'Afrique. Je dis et je vous remercie.
Merci Jean-Pierre. Et aussi votre méthode dialectique de présenter la question. Alors, le prochain, c'est Maxwell Sakanaya, c'est Liberian Business Association. Welcome. And we request to you, please, because we have no time.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
welcome.
Let me thank the presenters for the splendid performance. When we look at the statistics, even the 50 billion US dollars emphasized by President Mbeki is a conservative figure, as a matter of fact, it could be more. But I'm impressed by the two-third contribution from Rwanda as it relates to, domestic resource mobilization towards its budget. I had an opportunity to hold an hour-long meeting with former President Mbeki, and I told him, and which I will repeat here, one of the key factors responsible for illicit financial flow, across Africa, from Africa, is we have a form of economic apartheid, which I consider economic apartheid, like in my country. And I stressed to him that how can I be a Liberian? How can we be indigenous people and yet we own the wealth and resources in our country, but yet we remain so poor? So the opportunities that are given to foreign investments, that opportunity is not given to the indigenous business people. And I'm sure that cuts across Africa to a large extent. Even the tax incentive that are given to foreign businesses, the locals don't have that, tax incentive. And so if we can call on the trade union, how does that revenue leave from Africa? It has to be through workforce, as it is. So I think there's a need for critical consciousness, if it is there as it is already, to consolidate that critical consciousness amongst the trade unions, and for them to understand that those of us in this room, what we want in our respective countries, so long the will is there will be a way. This is a powerful force in this room that can change this continent, but it has to do with commitment. And this is why we all should focus on one party in our respective countries. And when I say one party, I'm not talking in terms of number. I'm talking the party, for instance, in Liberia, the party called Liberia should supersede any other political party. So as we move, we'll look at these issues. So if we can call on our respective governments for what I term as strategic public, local, private partnership, which will see the empowerment of citizens, the empowerment of indigenous businesses. By that, we'll be able to help to curtail this, because more than 50% of illicit funding comes from multinational companies. I'm a businessman in Liberia. Ebola almost wiped our nation. And with all of that, they didn't leave my country. All the Liberian business people, they didn't leave, because that's our country. We remain there. So when citizens are empowered and we invest, the revenues we generate, the income we generate, we'll use it to develop our countries, and we'll take it out. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Donc, le prochain, il y a aussi des camarades qui veulent demander de la parole, mais nous sommes contraints par le temps parce que nous avons d'abord une pause café. Je vous préviens que le champ, la connexion est très faible maintenant. Donc, les messages passent difficilement. Alors, il vaut mieux qu'on soit très concis et concret. Peut-être qu'on sera obligé aussi de reporter quelques intervenants pour le panel. Hein? Qu'est-ce que vous en dites? Parce que le panel reviendra sur la même question. Donc, on va ajouter 2 intervenants, ou bien 3. Qu'est-ce que vous dites, mon secrétaire général? Et 1 minute pour chacun. 1 minute pour chacun. Et puis on va quand même prendre une pause comme mérite, parce que je vous dis, la connexion commence à diminuer sérieusement. Bon, le prochain c'est Ramtani Zaïd, UGTA, Algérie. Vous passez au micro et je vous recommande de poser vos questions dans 1 minute, 60 secondes, je veux dire.
Bonjour à tous. Donc, micro, c'est bon? Alors, je remercie d'abord les intervenants, M. Vladimir et Mme Monique, pour leur intervention. Moi, je voudrais être très circoncis et je voudrais répondre favorablement à votre préoccupation, M. le Président, en matière de gestion de temps, donc je serai très bref. Donc, ma question, va porter sur le rôle de la diaspora, sur lequel on doit en parler. Monsieur le Président, vous avez annoncé un chiffre de 30 millions de compatriotes qui sont installés à l'étranger. Parmi ces 30 millions, mon pays, à lui seul, on compte peut-être 10%. C'est un arsenal qu'il faut mobiliser. Mais entre-temps, qu'est-ce que nos États ont fait pour intéresser justement ces compatriotes à transférer leurs fonds? Est-ce qu'il n'est pas judicieux aujourd'hui de s'intéresser à ces compatriotes et leur préparer des mesures spécifiques dans le cadre d'investissement ou quelque chose qui les intéresse? Et je vous remercie.
Merci. Alors, qui fait mieux? Qui fait mieux? Zachary, je suis sûr, tu es mon ami, tu vas faire mieux.
Merci, camarades. Je voudrais remercier les deux intervenants et surtout la camarade gouverneur, vice-gouverneur, parce que je pense mobiliser les ressources, c'est surtout d'abord l'épargne nationale à travers le système bancaire, et c'est leur rôle important, et je voudrais qu'elles partagent cette expérience du contrôle des flux vers l'extérieur. Et quelqu'un a parlé hier, enfin nous avons discuté pendant ces 3 jours, la corruption, l'impunité et les paradis fiscaux. Si nous nous demandons, est-ce que les Mauriciens, les travailleurs mauriciens sont plus heureux que les Burundais? Je ne crois pas. Donc, on a beau transférer les flux financiers vers Maurice, nos camarades là-bas souffrent les mêmes problèmes. Je souhaite que le rôle du syndicat, nous puissions être acteurs, comme la campagne que nous menons, en sonnant les alertes et en dénonçant les flux financiers et les fuites de capitaux. Nous sommes dans le système bancaire, nous sommes dans les multinationales, jouons notre rôle de sonneur d'alerte. Et c'est ça l'éthique des cadres. Et je voudrais que les syndicats qui sont dans les conseils d'administration, dans les conseils économiques et sociaux, dans les parlements, jouent leur rôle déjà à ce niveau pour que l'épargne nationale reste au niveau national. Merci.
Merci Zachary. Tu as fait un effort vraiment considérable et qui fait mieux encore. La prochaine, c'est une femme et toujours les grands défis, c'est les femmes. Je sais que vous avez relevé le défi du temps maintenant. Monica Koto, Kenya. En 1 minute, je suis sûr que vous allez exprimer ce que nous préoccupe au plus profond de nous-mêmes.
Thank you, Brother Chairman. I would like to thank the two presenters for the very important information which they have given us. But the challenge again is coming to us as trade unions. The issue of illicit financial flow and harmful taxation, they don't find us automatically. The amendment, and they amend when we are just present, we are not absent. My issue here is, I'm just urging the trade unions to be more alert. And since we are known to be pressure groups, we have to put pressure to the governments, our African governments, because these things are done within our governments and within our countries. At least to make sure that we have our representatives when decisions are made, when policies are formulated, our absence has brought this harmful, and if I can say a sin which God cannot even forgive. It has found us here. And because of our absence, and we seem as if we are sleeping, it is high time we must put an eye on whatever governments are doing, because they have not been, the representatives of governments have not been placed there automatically. It is we who put them there through elections. And we have left everything to go haywire by letting them do what they want, dictating terms on our people. And we have to use that pressure so that we stop these behaviors. The issue of abuse of democracy, which we are addressing today, and it has been addressed, it is also the root cause of many sufferings in Africa. And Africa, most of the African countries have been faced by conflicts as a result of abuse of democracy and poor governance. So it is high time again, trade unions, we must be awake to see that these loopholes are done away with through our advocacy and through our pressure. So we have the pressure, and we have all come together in solidarity as African trade unions and fight for these harmful issues which are affecting our government, our countries. Asante sana.
Merci beaucoup. Je passe la parole maintenant à Denis. Denis Pam. Non? C'est vous? Ok. Il mérite un applaudissement. Donc, vous aurez la médaille. Vincent, from Toko Swa. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. One expresses appreciation to the presenters. One would want to propose that clearly one of the outcomes has got to be that we can no longer afford to be moaning about countries like Mauritius. If they are part of the African continent, then clearly we must be able to sanction culprit countries, because then they will minimize coming up here with issues such as this, which are within our power to be able to deal with. But when dealing with the issue of the illicit financial flows, one wonders as to whether or not the African leaders are not party to these financial flows. I'm saying this because yesterday a participant also talked about the funds that you find that these leaders leave on their death, funds that they leave in Switzerland, wherever. Because if we do not tackle that, then clearly all the resolutions that the AU can take are not going to come to fruition for as long as there are resolutions that are going to hit at their pocket. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Donc la prochaine intervenante, c'est Sona Moussa de l'USTN du Niger. À vous la parole. Et je suis sûr aussi que vous allez gagner une médaille de bonne gouvernance du temps.
Merci, camarade président. En fait, mes propos font allusion à la question des richesses minières. Hier, un camarade a dit de manière fracassante qu'en Afrique, dès qu'un pays découvre les richesses minières, ça devient une source de difficultés. Et sa phrase semble avoir approuvé par l'assistance. J'aimerais bien savoir si cela est vrai et quelles en sont les raisons. Merci.
Vous méritez un applaudissement. Je pense qu'il faut l'applaudir encore plus fort. Et voilà, donc, la dernière intervention aussi de l'USTN du Niger, c'est Nana Orao Youssouf. Bon, si je prononce mal, vous m'excusez. À vous la parole, madame. très courte, bien sûr, pour gagner une autre médaille.
Merci, bonjour, chers congressistes. Merci à Panaf pour ses multiples efforts fournis depuis 26 ans. Et merci à nos orateurs et modérateurs. Notre cause, c'est d'avoir une Afrique bien faite et bien pleine. Je ne peux pas donner les raisons qui sous-tendent bien faite et bien pleine. En place. La société civile comme les syndicats en dénoncent, mais ils ne sont pas partie intégrante des prises de décision. Ils ne sont pas associés. Ça aussi, c'est une autre lutte qui nous attend et on doit réfléchir sur la bonne manière à prendre. Merci.
Merci, madame. Donc, le dernier intervenant, c'est Harrington Chibanda de la Zambie. And we request you to be very short, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, but when you call your employer to speak, we will all agree that many developing countries seek to achieve greater levels of development by participating fully in the global economy. It is for this reason that they have opened their borders, I mean the countries, to a free flow of trade and investment capital. So much as we need local players on our capital markets, we cannot abandon foreign investment. And the major reason or objectives of a tax treaty are firstly to encourage economic growth by mitigating international double taxation and other barriers to cross-border trade and investment. And secondly, Chairperson, it is to improve tax administration in any two contracting states by reducing opportunities for international tax evasion, which we must be concerned about. International tax evasion, Chairperson, it really undermines a country's tax policy, preventing that policy to be implemented. And therefore, all countries taxing worldwide income encounter serious problems in collecting the proper income tax on profits derived outside their borders. And this is particularly acute in developing countries, of which most of them are in Africa. The consequences of international tax evasion, Chairperson, can be acute in developing countries. Evasion is mostly accompanied by a loss of the badly needed investment capital and foreign exchange reserves. It is only where there is an effective bilateral tax treaty that the risk of international tax evasion can be reduced. So, Chairperson, speaking as business at this important forum, would like to hear, or rather find means or rather ways of synergies. How do workers' organizations in Africa synergize with employers' organizations in Africa? What is our common ground? In our advocacy role, what issues should we be talking about which favor sustainability of businesses and employment creation, which is of interest to both the employers' organizations and the workers' organizations? And so I stand here, Chairperson, as an employer representative, to also join you in condemning illicit financial flows. But as we do so, I want to stand out and say that we cannot condemn bilateral tax treaties because there is a great benefit. My colleague from Zimbabwe did talk about what are the other forms of revenue to our governments other than tax. We do have non-tax revenue. But the question is, as labor movements, as employers' organizations, do we hold our governments accountable to tell us how much they are realizing from the non-tax revenue? Because that is another big stream of our revenue at national level. I could speak more, but because you don't want me to speak more, I'll end here. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Merci Harrington. Et je retiens, vous avez très bien conclu par une question très pertinente, comment travailler ensemble. Je ne sais pas est-ce que cette question est bien préparée, bien réfléchie ou bien spontanée. Effectivement, comment travailler tous ensemble en tant qu'acteurs, représentants des travailleurs, employeurs et gouvernements, pour transformer l'Afrique. C'est une très belle conclusion. Merci. Et il mérite un applaudissement. Bon, maintenant, nous sommes donc arrivés à la fin. Donc, je remercie tous les intervenants pour les questions très pertinentes et très percutantes qui ont enrichi ce banquet de discussion et de débat. Ça a certainement inspiré les intervenants pour ajouter encore des éléments qui vont renforcer et enrichir cette rencontre, ce débat. Bon, avant de leur donner la parole pour répondre et d'ajouter aussi des éléments qui jugent utiles, nous allons suspendre momentanément la séance pour aller prendre un thé ou un café. Je pense qu'on mérite bien parce que nous avons travaillé ce matin avec beaucoup d'ardeur. Donc nous avons 30 minutes et on se retrouve ici pour continuer. Merci. Dans 30 minutes. Alors, s'il vous plaît, c'est un moment. Hein? Bon, il se trouve que notre invité, notre honorable invité, a des contraintes juste après la pause. Donc, elle ne pourra pas être là parmi nous, elle a des engagements. Donc, nous vous proposons de lui donner la parole pour répondre et aussi de terminer avec notre camarade à gauche et puis on prend la pause et on revient après. Voilà. À vous la parole.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Not so many questions were directed to me, but I'll make a comment on a few of the questions. The questions that are really calling upon the trade unions to play more role, I think I can't agree with them more. And also to really pay more attention on these issues of economic freedom, on these issues of economic prosperity, and so on and so forth. So that's it's good. I mean, these checks and balances, they're always good, and they keep everyone checked and accountable. In Rwanda, we believe much in accountability. There was a question on other ways of raising resources. It has been mentioned that taxes and non-tax revenues, like the loyalties and so many, a number of fees and so on and so forth. But also, our government can also raise money from the capital markets. It's also another source of income. In Rwanda, one of the secrets, there is one question on what was the secret in terms of really raising that capacity very much. I think one is generally the governance, good governance in all areas, but also there is an issue of tax base, l'assiette fiscale. If you have an economy that has been growing on average at 8% over the last 15 years, so it means that there is something to pay tax on. Another one, and which is a big one, is efficiency in administration. We used to have tax departments in the Ministry of Finance. And from 1998, I guess, or thereabout, a decision, I don't remember which year Rwanda Revenue Authority was created. Yeah, but it was a big reform and a very good decision to have an authority that is autonomous, that is going to put in place systems and also accountability and build capacity and work with the colleagues in the region. Really, that efficiency in tax administration, harness technology in doing so, it's one of the secrets that have helped that. And they manage both the tax revenues, non-tax revenues at the national level and at the local government level. That's where we are today. There was another question in that line on attacking the heavens, like Mauritius and others, and the treaties. I'm not going to dwell on that because the last speaker has mentioned. But I think we have also to be knowledgeable about these legal texts and what they mean, because before we judge and before we get our decision or action informed by the reality. I think that's something maybe that I would recommend, so that any action is going to be based on the reality on the ground, and we don't use what we know in theory or just things like that. My last comment, I'll make it on the issue of explosive demographics. The whole trick is on how you manage your demographic dividend as a country. If you do it bad, then it can indeed explode, and there's so many youth don't have access to employment because they are not employable, because they are not well educated, they cannot have those skills. And in Rwanda, I think we are putting more emphasis on how you can raise the employability level of the Rwandans and the human capital in general in terms of health, education, well-being generally. Okay, I think I'll stop here. Thank you. Yeah, I've covered all the questions. There is one question from Zachary. Is it coming? Ok, ça marche.
Ça marche maintenant?
Thank you. The last question I'm going to comment on is Zachary's question on our experience in limiting or preventing these. I think we have in Rwanda an open capital account policy. We don't like ban people from transferring their capital, but what we're doing as an economy is to create conditions so that you attract capital rather than creating incentives for it to fly outside. And that's in line with openness policies broadly. And in those things that we are doing to attract capital, I think I mentioned them in my presentation. Thank you.
Merci Madame pour ces éclaircissements, ces explications qui ont enrichi davantage votre présentation et aussi vos recommandations, donc, et votre contribution par rapport au thème de cette conférence. Donc on vous remercie beaucoup pour vos efforts. Et maintenant, nous passons la parole à notre camarade Alvin pour répondre aux questions qui lui ont été adressées.
Thank you. I think that Madam Monique has made my work a lot much easier because she has responded to, I think, a number of questions, and I would also not like to comment on comments. We'll end up making another presentation. So I think that there has been a number of very interesting comments and very concrete proposals that have been made, which I hope that will flow into the final outcome document, so that we are not just having a conversation, but there are very concrete proposals that are coming out of this conversation. I'll start with, I think, a very important comment that was made by Madam Monique, that which again relates to the question of how do we deal with Mauritius. The high-level panel report says that the issue of illicit financial flows is a global phenomenon with an African face. We cannot solve this problem as a country or as a continent alone. We have seen, and some of you that might have noticed this, there's been a huge scandal around what was called the Swiss leaks, of rich people, rich individuals that were hiding money in Switzerland, which was followed again with the LuxLeaks, how Luxembourg was offering secretive agreements to companies in terms of using Luxembourg as a conduit to reduce the taxes. So while we are focusing, and it's important to focus on the African problem, we need to, the solutions are global. We might sanction Mauritius, but the island of Jersey will be opening up, or Cayman Island, or I don't know any scandal in Kenya or any other country that does not in one way or the other involve one of these security jurisdictions. And as a solution, I think we need to look at the global transparency as some of them that I mentioned. Nevertheless, I think that back at home there are a number of things that we need to get straight, and I think the comments made by Monique are also very important in terms of how do we strengthen our own local institutions. There was a presentation that was made a while back by a revenue authority officer from Uganda, who said that somebody planning to avoid paying tax or to evade paying tax has three very simple considerations to make. The first consideration is, if I evade paying tax or avoid paying tax, will I get caught? That has to do with the capacity of revenue authority to track down the taxpayers and know that who's reporting on what tax. The second question, if I get caught, will I get punished? That has to do with the judicial systems that you have in place to ensure that those people that have been caught avoiding or evading tax are also getting punished. The third is, even if I get punished, is the punishment severe enough that the cost-benefit analysis, if I get caught and the punishment is $10,000 and what I avoided paying is. So that has to do with the kind of punitive measures that the law has. So those are the kind of things which sort of boils down to the kind of institutions that you have established across the value chain, starting from the policing to the administration to the judiciary. All the strengthening of that, I think, will contribute significantly. Nevertheless, of course, looking at the kind of global dimensions. The other point that I think was cutting across here was the perceived complexity of tax. Until very few years ago, when you meet someone and you tell them you're working on tax, the first idea they came to mind is that you must be either working with one of the big accounting firms, or you're working with the revenue authorities, you're working for government. This is a space, and that has been emphasized, that trade unions and civil society organizations need to occupy and get into. I was privileged to be sitting in one of the meetings in Sierra Leone where the government had sort of opened up a public consultation as the government of Sierra Leone was about to introduce VAT. Then you had all these private sector players saying, if you introduce VAT on mining, these will be the implications. If you introduce VAT on this will be the implications. But who was speaking for the citizens? Who was speaking for the workers? Who was speaking for? And those are the kind of spaces that we need to identify and occupy. And so that we ensure that whatever decisions and designs, that policy designs are coming, do reflect the interests of those constituencies that we represent. The other point I would want to speak to is the question of political capture. Again, a very, very big problem because in many countries in Africa, the beneficiaries of skewed tax policies are the lawmakers themselves. I can give you an example of Kenya. The double tax agreements that Kenya assigned with Mauritius was largely pushed by Kenyan business elites who saw that as an opportunity to use Mauritius as an avenue to minimize their tax obligations. How we address this, I think, is political sensitization, ensuring that, as against in one of my slides, exposing some of these political capture, political interest, vested interest. You have a situation of what you can call the revolving door, where people are revolving between governments and private sector, and you lose sight of who are they actually speaking for. The other example I would like to give is that either as a continent or as a country, we have the leeway of instituting particular policymakers that make it at least reduce the scope of exposure to tax haven or tax havens. Brazil, for example, has a model where they say these are the list of countries we consider tax havens. It was our own decision. We did our own mathematics, found that or decided that Jersey and Cayman Island and Isle of Man, they're all tax havens. So if you are a company that is operating in Brazil and you have a jurisdiction, you are operating in Brazil, but you have subsidiaries in any of these countries we consider as tax havens, we will just slap a 10% tax on that. It is up to you to be able to convince us that you actually made. So you shift the burden of proof, not to you to be able to prove, but you shift the burden of proof to those countries, so they're able to justify why are they operating from that. So it's something that we need to consider as a continent, if something that would be useful. There was a comment about double tax agreements, and I think I need to clarify. Double tax agreements are not bad per se. It's the design of them, and I think that Monique did emphasize on that. It is the design how to ensure that whenever you're signing those kind of agreements, with which jurisdictions are you signing those agreements? What are the benefits out of that? The East African community, for example, they do have double tax agreement within themselves to ensure that if you are a Kenyan company operating in Uganda, you are not paying taxes in both jurisdictions, which I think is a good way of streamlining investment and ensuring that the cross-border trade between domestic companies is agreed, but they become problematic when they create loopholes. And in this particular case, I think that Rwanda, for instance, is at the moment reviewing its double tax agreement with Mauritius. A number of African countries have undertaken the steps to try and, yes, we might sign that double tax agreement, but we'll ensure that the specific taxes that Mauritius does not collect either way. Mauritius collects 5% royalty on tax on royalties. Rwanda is 10%. So we say, in that particular case, we will stick with the highest figure of 10%. You can still have that double tax agreement is designed in a manner that is beneficial to your country. Sort of say we need to increase taxation, the vegetable sellers, and have government running, and this is, for example, a case we are seeing again to 3.2 million, and they clearly state in that policy document that targeting taxes, they are targeting the board might know that. So we need to ensure that while you're expanding your tax base, which direction are you doing it? There are particular operations, there are particular entities that hide under the guise of informal sector to try and minimize the attacks. Particularly if you look at the real estate sector, for example, a big problem in many countries where it is being used beyond just tax evasion, also money laundering. We're having these cases in many countries where people are using real estate sector as an avenue to shift profits or hide their profits, and they operate under the informal sector. So we need to differentiate when we are talking of the informal sector, which specific sectors are we looking at, and how do we ensure that we are targeting the sectors that would be more, would add more revenue, add more value. I'll stop there, I think, because many of the other comments, many of the other things were comments, and go for break. Thank you very much.
Merci Alvin, merci aussi Madame Monica. Donc ces réponses ont certainement répondu à vos préoccupations concernant la question de la fiscalité et l'évasion fiscale. Pour le reste des conclusions, après la pause café, donc, nous allons présenter toutes ces conclusions. En votre nom, on remercie les deux intervenants. On vous remercie aussi, vous, pour votre patience et aussi la qualité de votre participation pour enrichir ce débat et cette discussion. Donc maintenant, nous allons prendre une pause de 30 minutes que nous méritons et on se retrouve ici. Merci. Et on applaudit encore une fois les deux intervenants. Dans 30 minutes.